Welcome to Depression, a first-person journey. My name is G. I want to ask you something before we get into this episode today, and I want you to really think about the question before answering it immediately. When was the last time you felt something, genuinely, fully felt it, without immediately doing something to make the feeling stop? Not distracted yourself, not pushed through it, not reframed it into something more manageable, or redirected it into productivity, or buried it under the next obligation on the list. Just felt it, sat in it, let it be what it was without trying to fix it or finish it before it was ready to be finished. I am asking because I have been sitting with that question myself, in therapy, in moments when I cannot outrun my own life anymore. And what I have been discovering, slowly, uncomfortably, with the particular embarrassment of a man who thought he had a reasonable handle on himself, is that I do not have a very good answer. I have spent most of my life being extraordinarily skilled at not feeling things, not because I am cold, not because I do not care, but because somewhere in my earliest years, in the house I described in the last episode, I learned that certain feelings were not available to me, not safe, not acceptable, not part of the version of myself that the world around me had room for. This episode is about those feelings, about what they were, about where they went when they had nowhere to go, and about what it is costing me, what it costs every man who learned the same lesson, to finally start learning that they were always allowed to exist. I am still in the early part of that learning. I want to be honest about that. I am not going to stand here and tell you I have cracked this open and found freedom on the other side. I am in the recognition phase, the part where you begin to see what has been true for a very long time without me being fully aware. Just because you recognize it does not mean it is resolved, but it is the only honest place to begin. There is a curriculum that boys receive growing up that nobody writes down and nobody officially teaches, but that gets delivered nonetheless. Through the reactions of the adults around them, through what gets praised and what gets dismissed, through the look on someone's face when a boy cries, through the tone of voice that says toughen up without ever using those exact words. That curriculum says this: emotions show weakness. Certain emotions in particular, fear, sadness, vulnerability, are incompatible with being a man. They are things to be overcome, suppressed, hidden. A boy who feels them too openly is soft. A boy who expresses them too freely will not survive what the world has in store for him. Better to learn early how to keep them contained. Nobody sat me down and told me this explicitly. Nobody needed to. The lesson was delivered in 100 smaller moments across the entire span of my childhood, at home, in our neighborhood, and culturally, where the emotional atmosphere was already complicated and there was not always room for one more feeling in the air. Among peers and family, where the social cost of showing fear or sadness or genuine distress was immediate and merciless. In the broader culture of what it meant to be male, strong, capable, unaffected, moving forward regardless of what was happening inside. I received that curriculum completely. I graduated with honors. I became extraordinarily good at the thing it was teaching me, and I am only now beginning to understand what that education actually cost me. Let me start with fear because I think it is the one that surprises people most when they hear a man admit to it. I was afraid a lot as a child. It was fear that comes from living in an environment where the emotional environment could change without warning, where the tension between the adults in your life was a constant low-grade presence that you could feel but could not control or predict, where your siblings did everything in their power to chastise, ridicule, and bully you, where you understood, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that stability was fragile and could shift at any moment. That fear did not have a name when I was living it as a child. It was just daily life, a background hum, and I learned very quickly that expressing it, showing it, saying it, asking for reassurance about it, did not produce the outcomes I needed. So, I learned to manage it instead, to appear unaffected, to keep moving, to project a confidence I did not always feel, because confidence was what the environment rewarded, and fear was what it had no patience for. I got so good at managing fear that I stopped being able to distinguish it from the absence of feeling. I thought I was brave. I thought I was capable. And I was. But beneath all of it, the fear was still there, still running, still shaping decisions and responses, and the particular hypervigilance I carried into every new situation. It showed up as the need to control outcomes, as the difficulty in trusting people fully, as the low-grade anxiety that lived just beneath the surface of even my most productive seasons, as the reason I could never fully rest, because rest requires the belief that things are safe enough to put down for a moment, and I had never fully learned that things were safe. I am beginning to understand in therapy that what I called strength for most of my life was, in significant part, managed fear. That does not diminish the strength, but it changes what I understand about where it came from and what it was protecting. Here is something interesting about the emotional curriculum most men receive. While it shuts the door on fear and sadness and vulnerability, it leaves one feeling largely available. One feeling that does not get labeled as weakness. One that can even get coded as strength, as passion, as the mark of a man who takes things seriously. Anger. Anger was the emotion that had permission to surface in the environments I grew up in. It was not necessarily expressed loudly or violently. It was more subtle than that. But anger was clear in a way that sadness was not. Frustration was understandable in a way that fear was not. Irritability was a recognizable response to difficulty in a way that grief was not. And so, without consciously deciding to, I learned to route a lot of what I was actually feeling through anger. When I was afraid, it often came out as irritability. When I was sad, it often came out as withdrawal that had an edge to it. When I was hurt, it came out as something harder than hurt, something that looked less vulnerable and therefore felt less dangerous to show. But I did not understand, what I am still learning, is that anger used this way is not actually anger. It is a translation. It is every other feeling that had nowhere to go being converted into the one currency the environment would accept. And the problem with spending your whole emotional life in translation is that the original meaning gets lost. You stop being able to identify what you actually feel beneath the anger because the translation has become so automatic that you have forgotten there was ever a source text. Therapy is teaching me to go back to the source, to ask, before I name what I am feeling as frustration or irritability or that edged withdrawal I have always defaulted to, what is actually underneath this? What is the feeling before the translation? And the answer, more often than I expected, is something much softer and much older than anger. It is fear. It is sadness. It is the vulnerability of a man who learned very early that those things were not safe to show, and who has spent decades showing something harder in their place. Sadness is the one that gets me the most when I sit with it honestly. Because sadness, of the three, is the one I had the least access to. The one that felt the most fundamentally incompatible with the version of myself I was required to be. Boys do not cry. That was the message. Not always spoken, frequently communicated by the adult's actions. And the tragedy of it is not just that it is wrong, it is that it cuts a person off from one of the most important emotional processes available to a human being. Grief is not a malfunction. Sadness is not a weakness. They are the way the mind and body process loss, disappointment, pain. They are the mechanism through which difficult experiences get metabolized rather than stored. When you shut that mechanism down, when you train yourself from childhood not to access it, the experiences do not disappear. They accumulate. They go somewhere. They live in the body, in your nervous system, in the heaviness that descends sometimes without an identifiable cause, because it is not responding to the present. It is responding to everything that was never processed, everything that was swallowed rather than felt, everything that needed to move through that was instead held in place. I have sadness stored in me that goes back decades. I can feel the edge of it sometimes in therapy, when the conversation touches something old and true, and the feeling that rises is something I do not immediately have an explanation for. And my instinct, even now, in a room specifically designed for this kind of thing, is too much for me. to analyze, to move into my head rather than staying in the feeling. Because the feeling is unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar territory is where the old training kicks in the hardest. I have not yet fully learned how to cry. I am saying this because I think it matters. Not in the sense that I am incapable of it, but in the sense that I have not yet learned to let it happen naturally, without me resisting and pushing it away, without the shame that follows it even when I am alone. That is still something I am working on, something therapy is slowly making more possible. But I can feel the edges of it now. I can feel that there is something there, that it is real, that it has been waiting for longer than I realized, and that the feeling of it when it finally arrives fully will not break me because I have been doing the work to prepare for it. This is the part that I think is most important for anyone listening, particularly any man who recognizes himself in what I have been describing. The feelings you were never allowed to feel did not disappear. They did not evaporate because your environment had no room for them. They went somewhere. And understanding where they went is one of the most clarifying things therapy has offered me. Some of them became physical. Tension that lives in the body with no clear origin. Fatigue that sleep does not always fix. The restlessness that has been running through my mind on high alert for so long that I do not know how to relax. I do not know how to quiet my mind. Your body keeps the score. That is not just a phrase. It is a description of a real process. What the mind cannot process, the body holds. Sometimes for years. Some becomes behavioral. The running, the avoidance, the addictions, the seeking of sensation and distraction in places that offered temporary relief from the pressure of everything that was building beneath the surface. The pursuit of external validation as a substitute for the inner peace that the unexpressed feelings were preventing. Every behavior I have talked about on this channel that caused damage, to myself and to the people I love, had this as part of its root system, not as an excuse, as an explanation. There is a difference, and I hold that difference very carefully. Some of them became the depression itself, because depression, particularly in men, is the darkness you feel that people cannot imagine. It is quiet, more insidious. It is the disconnection, the sense of moving through and existing rather than living, the going through the motions with a skill that masks the fact that something important has gone offline. I have been living with some version of that for a long time. I am only beginning to understand this. It was the cost of everything I was not allowing myself to feel. I said at the beginning of this episode that I am in the recognition phase rather than the resolution phase, and I want to explain what that actually means, because I think it is important for the men listening who might be in the same place and not have language for it yet. When you begin to recognize the problem, it is called the recognition stage. This is where you begin to see something that has always been true about yourself, but you did not have the frame of mind or the words to describe it. It is extremely uncomfortable. In some ways, it is more disorienting than not knowing, because not knowing at least has the comfort of consistency. Recognition disrupts the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and why you do what you do. It feels like this. You are in a situation, a conversation, a moment of conflict, a quiet evening alone, and something rises inside of you that you would have previously labeled as frustration or irritability or just a bad mood. And then, because of the work you have been doing, you pause, and you ask yourself the question your therapist has been teaching you to ask. What is actually happening here? What is this feeling beneath the feeling? And you feel it, just for a moment. A flash of something older and softer and more honest than the default translation. Is it fear? Or is it sadness? And then, this is the part I am still working on, the recognition arrives and you do not know what to do with it. Because you have spent so long not having access to these feelings that having access to them is disorienting rather than immediately liberating. You see these feelings and you do not yet have the tools to stay in them, to give them space, to let them complete themselves rather than cutting them short. Now that is where I am. beginning to see things clearer, still learning to stay with what I see and feel. It is not a fun place to be, but it is an honest one. And honest is the only direction that leads anywhere worth going. I want to speak directly to the men who did not get the chance to let themselves feel, because I know you are out there. I know you because I am you, or I have been you, or I am in the slow, uncomfortable process of becoming someone different from you. You have probably built a very good life on top of the foundation of not feeling things. You are probably capable and live a productive life. You probably look, from the outside, like someone who has it all together, and in many ways, you do. But there is something running beneath all of that. It is something that shows up in the restlessness that will not stay quiet. It is in the relationships that never quite reach the depth they could. It is in the moments of inexplicable emptiness in the middle of a life that should, by every external measure, feel full. It is in the anger that arrives faster than the situation warrants and lingers longer than it should. It is in the exhaustion of maintaining a version of yourself that is always slightly different from what is actually true. That something is not a flaw. It is not evidence that you are broken or weak or beyond repair. It is entirely the result of having learned that in an environment that did not give you another option, your feelings were not safe to have. But let me tell you something, gentlemen. They are safe. I need you to hear that even if you cannot feel it yet, whatever you were taught about what your emotions meant, about what they said about your strength, your manhood, your worth, that was all wrong. Not maliciously wrong in most cases, but wrong. And the life you could be living on the other side of unlearning it is more real and more connected and more genuinely yours than what you are currently able to access. You do not have to arrive there all at once. You do not have to feel everything immediately or have a nervous breakdown in the name of emotional authenticity. You just have to be willing to start asking the question, what am I actually feeling right now? That right there is the first step. Just that one question. Just the willingness to pause long enough to ask it rather than moving past it the way you always have. Just start there, and everything else follows from there. I started this episode by asking when you last felt something uncomfortable without immediately trying to make it stop. I want to end it with something slightly different. I am not asking you to feel everything all at once. I am not asking you to dismantle in a moment what was built over decades. I am asking something smaller and more sustainable than that. I am asking you to notice. The next time something rises in you, the frustration, the anger, the restlessness, just notice it. Do not analyze it. Do not immediately act on it or suppress it. Just notice that it is there. Name it if you can. And if you cannot name it yet, just acknowledge its presence, that it exists, that it has always existed, that it has been waiting, patiently, for you to finally have enough time, enough space, and enough safety to let it be seen. I am doing that work alongside you. I am still largely in the recognition phase. I am still learning what it means to stay with a feeling rather than manage it into submission. But I am doing it. And the fact that I can sit here and say that, out loud, on this channel, in front of whoever is listening, is itself evidence that something inside of me is shifting. Something that has been frozen for a very long time is beginning, very slowly, to thaw out. And as always, remember that your story is still being written.